Welcome back, everyone. So what we want to do at this point, so hopefully you've enjoyed the individual presentations and getting their perspective. What we wanted to do at this point was to give the panelists an opportunity to have a little interactive discussion and then also to answer some of your questions. So what I'd like to start out with the panelists as a beginning is to ask you, what have you've had a chance to hear everybody speak individually. So what have you thought about what you've heard? Joe, can you start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question because we were actually just talking on the break that as everyone else was presenting, right, there's so much good overlap. Like, that's another point I need to bring up. So yeah, in fact, I think I've scribbled notes of 4 or 5 or 6. But I think, maybe one to start off with is, I think through all the presentations, there's been this great theme of kind of, collective action or collectively defining what a problem is and moving forward, trying to create consensus on what are we going to use this technology for. And I think, from Lisa's presentation, we heard a lot of great ways to do that, right? There's surveys, there's listening tours, there's, like Mary Anthony did at the Brown Bank, bringing communities actually together. But I think there's actually one other one where, you can actually use technology not just to figure out where to find the consensus to put the technology, but you can actually use the technology itself to help drive that consensus. So there's some interesting examples of like Taiwan, Virtual Taiwan, where they've created, essentially a social platform, but the rules are engineered, so it's different than most social media, which tends to drive us, like troll memes and things like that, to polarization. It's designed to, by the rules, kind of drive towards consensus. So it's a consensus-making mechanism that they've been using in Taiwan for a few years to try to figure out things like, hey, what should our regulatory stance on these new technologies be? Autonomous vehicles and things like that. So I think that things like that offer a great opportunity, not just to figure out where technology is going and how we should use it in our cities, but to in fact determine where that's going. Use the technology to point where the technology is going.
Got it. Lisa, how about for you?
Yeah, I was delighted to hear how human-centric the conversation was. That is so critical, and so I'm so glad that continues to be a laser focus. Interesting enough, the question came up a few times in terms of the carbon footprint reduction. What we do, 40% of the carbon comes from the buildings in your city. So if you retrofit your buildings, and you just put a little plug in there for building retrofits and so forth, you're already 40% there. So I think that's a big step forward. And so many people don't realize that, the amount of carbon that's emitted from buildings. So take a look at your buildings, retrofit your buildings, and you're kind of on that path, which is great. And I'm so happy to see that you're all focused on sustainability. I remember you're running on sustainability, but I don't think you can have a conversation with SMART or Secure, Connect, Resilient without making sure that sustainability is part of that discussion. And I'm also delighted to hear that the future investments that are being looked at are also being looked at that need to be environmentally friendly. The administration has done so much to raise that conversation across the nation that I certainly hope that that's the way we move forward. So this has been fantastic.
Got it. Actually, you bring up an interesting point. And Mayor Mason, how about from your perspective?
I mean, it's such a, cities at the end of the day are about people coming together and cultivating their humanity, right? And so I've too been really pleased with the conversation really being about it being a means to an end and not a thing unto itself. It's also, I think we all grew up watching enough dystopian science fictions about what was going to happen when the AI takes over or whatever, that I think there's a decent amount of consciousness about, we don't want to lose our humanity in this process. But I think the people-centric piece of it and the equity-centered piece of it are really, really powerful things. And so, it really is a reflection of what are your community's goals and then how to use technology to achieve them. And it's, like many things, it's about, using innovation to articulate and fulfill your goals and your values. And so that's another way of thinking about it.
Good point. So here's one. How does Wisconsin stand in terms of smart city progress versus the rest of the United States and versus the greater world? I'll let any one of you tackle that one, or all of you, however you'd like.
I know right now, so the cities across America have sister cities in Europe and across the world. Mm-hmm. Similarly, there's a sister state that the state of Wisconsin has with Hessen, Germany, which has been a real leader in smart city design. And so there's been some discussion at the state level between that level of government and our level that I've been involved in that's been really interesting. Just as an aside, Germany announced last week that they were approving autonomous taxis, like that, not like in a couple years, not someday, just like now. They're approving autonomous taxis going into the market.
Wow.
So I think that there's definitely things that we can learn about what other parts of the world do to incentivize smart city work. And so, look, there is no doubt in bigger cities, particularly ones that have big research universities and, Silicon Valley and on the East Coast, that there might be more capital involved to do some of that monetization. But we do find in other parts of the world that this is something that the government invests in every bit as much as it does in other key infrastructure. We just have a different approach to it. Again, not to go back to this infrastructure conversation, but I think some of the most interesting conversations about the infrastructure bill that's moving through Congress isn't just, well, what do we think we need? Are we being too generous or too constricting in our view of it? It's, do we want to be competitive at the world level anymore or not? And I really think that's what we're talking about here. And so I do think that Wisconsin could certainly do more. But I think even writ large, I think as a culture, as a country, the fight for the 21st century is now, and whether or not we're going to fall behind China or Europe or other parts of the world because we've neglected our investments in innovation and infrastructure, that's really what this summer's debate is about. And so would I love for the state of Wisconsin to give more grants out to cities like mine who are doing this work? I would. The other thing that I will say that is really interesting that I've seen Germany and other parts of Asia doing is cities are actually creating sort of nonprofit corporations to run their smart city work. Mm-hmm. So they'll partner with a university or the equivalent of what the state has with community development authorities, where it's actually sort of a standalone nonprofit entity that actually runs some of these partnerships. So it's not, and so I've been impressed how other jurisdictions have been intentional, not only about how to partner with the private sector in terms of bringing resources, innovations in, but even structurally within how a city functions to be able to do that.
Good points. Lisa, Joe, both of you are with global corporations or global organizations. What are you seeing around the world? Lisa, maybe from your perspective.
Yeah, that is headquartered in Wisconsin.
It was headquartered in Wisconsin, yes.
Right, and I agree with everything that Corey just said. Yeah, again, it's a real luxury to be able to work in different regions, to be able to see areas where you can build, a city in the desert versus where you have to go into a mature built environment and do it. So the challenges are there. I think a lot of it really depends on the leadership and how also they're engaged with their constituents and citizens. I remember that the Princess of Denmark, I believe, they call her the Green Princess because she's so focused on water resiliency. And I believe from a sister standpoint, I think they're the sister. I think Copenhagen is a sister to Houston. And so there's this big resiliency and water issue in terms of urban flooding and all the disaster recovery that they have there. So just watching that and them working together, I think it's wonderful. It's great. That's a great thing for the audience to know is really, if your city is not the one that's at the forefront, look to a sister city, which I believe you all have them in theory, some more in practice, and see what they're doing, because you might be able to learn a lot. I think there's places in Asia that, and again, I brought up Singapore before, but I think there's other parts of Asia that are doing phenomenal work. There is so much innovation going on in India, and there are so many smart city projects going on, even though the Smart Cities Council has a real focus just in India alone and also just in Australia. But the work that's being done in India, and then again, other places in Europe, we can look to London. I think I spoke with the CIO of London, and I think he had 63 different initiatives going on. Most of them were public-private partnerships. All of them were in the smart city space. So it really depends on how you define what smart cities is and also what that return is. So I'm looking forward to more cities aggregating their data or their experiences and putting them into either archives or some type of database so that they can be shared with others, so that the lessons can be learned of a like-sized city or the like priority cities, areas that have coastal issues and sea level rise, other places that are in, tornado or hurricane spaces, other ones that are dealing with earthquakes and constant, resiliency issues, and then they can kind of look at what a comparison is. So I think we can all learn from each other. It's a luxury to work in a global position, because I'm always so impressed with what our colleagues are doing there. And on a weekly basis, I realize that they look to us to be the leaders. And unfortunately, in many areas we are, but in, I think, infrastructure, I believe that we're number 13th in the world. I think they ranked us with a D+. Might have gone up to a C- this year, I think. But the whole infrastructure, and any American, it's a travesty to think of that we're that far down on the list of infrastructure when we're supposed to be, at least number one in our minds.
Yeah, it's interesting when I have students, they all still see America as the top. And I said, America's got a lot of great things, but you need to look at the rest of the world if you're going to innovate and stay on top of things. It's just you see so many other innovations coming from other places of the world. So, Joe, you're a global organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll take inspiration from something Mayor Mason said earlier, which was like, it's really easy to drive autonomous vehicles in the desert. And it's, as you get those things in a built environment, they get more complex, right? Like the underlying technology of autonomous vehicles, like LiDAR, right? It's from like 1967. And you have, Oshkosh's Terramax, that wins DARPA Grand Challenge in like 2007, give or take a year. And that's the technology level, then the device level. But to get to the full system, like how do we have this operating in a society? Like we're still not there, to your point. And I think the idea becomes, when we think about smart cities technologies, these technologies operating at that systems level, those systems are just really complicated in the United States and Wisconsin. And that's not a bad thing, right? Because what it does is it actually, to influence that system level, there's actually lots of different levers you can pull. So, one of those is certainly government as a buyer or a user of technology. And so if we look across and we see ourselves kind of falling behind there, but it's difficult for government to do that, that's not necessarily a problem. There's other levels. We tend to think of them as three. One, government as a technology user, buyer, developer. Government is an infrastructure provider, right? And I think you heard Mayor Mason and Mayor Antaramian talk about that, right? Building out that fiber, because if you build the infrastructure on which these technologies will ride, if you build it, they will come kind of thing. And then finally, as a regulator, I think we heard about that as well. Things like autonomous vehicle sandboxes, drone sandboxes, where you can say, all right, you as companies can come experiment here and we'll do this. So I think just the fact that we're falling behind on government buying smart cities technology is not necessarily a problem, as long as, to Mayor Mason's point, we pay attention to those other levers and pull those, infrastructure and regulation as well.
I have just one more thing on that. So I had the opportunity to travel with the University of Wisconsin to our sister university that's located in Nanjing, China, and talk at this autonomous vehicle conference they were doing in China. And it was just really interesting from the Chinese perspective. They don't think that we will win on infrastructure because democracy is so inefficient. And literally openly scorn about it. Like we are going to win the race on infrastructure and innovation because democracy doesn't work. It's not efficient. And I actually take that as a real challenge. And I think that's part of this debate that we're having right now, is there's literally an argument about whether or not democracy and innovation can still work together. And there's a view in some parts of the world that actually says you have to sacrifice one to get the other. I actually think this is a really, a big time moment for the country to have this debate right now and really put it in that context. I think you want to have a place where democracy can flourish and innovation can flourish. And I think you want to have not one smart city plan, but 100 different smart city plans so that you can learn from one another and let your cities be the laboratories of innovation and democracy. But I do think there's this moment here where we have to decide if we're going to invest in ourselves and our future, or whether or not the Chinese critique of us is true. I don't think it is. I think they're wrong, but we've all got to step up and do our part.
It's interesting. I've had the opportunity to spend some time in China as well. And when you look at the whole social ranking score and what it's all based on and how everything's done and the conformity with the government to rules and regulations, it's a very interesting area. But again, if you want to make some decisions, to just get them pounded through, you can see where China might be able to do it quicker, not necessarily better. So I think there'll be some interesting aspects to that as time goes on. We got to save that one for a future show as well. And with that, Ash, this one says, I actually start out asking Mayor Mason, and then get the feedback from Lisa and Joe. Mayor Mason, so what originally got this started? You said you were new into the area, but what actually got your Smart Cities initiative started? Was there one particular thing, or how did it come about? and then asking Joe and Lisa to follow up. Is this similar to what you've seen or heard from other cities?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say you have companies like Johnson Controls. We have SCJ that has SC Johnson, which based in Racine, that's got a long sustainability legacy. You've got Foxconn and Amazon and other big players, big technology companies coming to the area, and it really was, well, how do I distinguish my community to compete in this new environment? Again, we're between Milwaukee and Chicago. Between the interstate and Lake Michigan, great opportunities. How do you distinguish yourself, and how do you provide leadership to your community and illustrate to the region that, hey, if you want to do innovation and if you want to be in a community that's trying to address equity and a high quality of life through smart city design, that Racine's a place that you want to be. And so that was really an early decision that I made as mayor, but I really sort of have gone all in on this approach, and I think it's starting to pay dividends as we do.
Yeah, you're seeing it. You're seeing it. Lisa, Joe, similar to what you've seen around the country, around the world, any other thoughts?
I mean, not every mayor or city manager, et cetera, steps up to that challenge. But when we have people like Mayor Mason that do, that's where the innovation, the beauty flourishes. I think that there is a new crop of municipal leaders too who know that they have to break from the old never being first, always waiting for 50 other, examples to happen. And there's some real early adopters. I'm seeing that through, and it will be interesting to see if you're seeing this as well, Joe, through the eyes of how they're looking to finance, how they're looking to partner, how they're looking to make 30 to 40 year decisions when their administrative cycles are only 4 years or, in 2 in some other areas. So just that innovative and forward thinking vision that I've been in this role now for 8 years, and global role for leading local government. Before that, I was more regional. So I've been here for a while, and I've been seeing like a shift, and it's definitely a pleasure. Pre-COVID, COVID fueled the experience because we had a lot of time to think. We all saw a lot of glaring gaps in our communities, and now we're recovery, et cetera. So, and it gave everyone a lot of thought in terms of, you said, what do I want to be? What do I want my city to be when it grows up, when it's in 10 years, et cetera. So yeah, I think that that's right in line with what we're seeing. And I think globally, the ones that are leading are the ones that are going to succeed, and in terms of competitive forces to keep people and families in their tax base.
Got it. Joe?
No, I'd agree. In fact, I was struck by something Mayor Mason said earlier, which was, kind of emblematic of a trend I tend to see both in smart cities and actually kind of technology adoption more broadly for government and commercial industry, which is this, the fiber network in Racine, right? So it was built out for one kind of municipal purpose. And then suddenly you realize, oh my goodness, we can use this for so many other things, and kind of it expands its value after it's been built. And I think you see that trend again and again and again, right? So like package tracking, for example, right? This is like this core customer service thing that we're so used to, but it actually didn't start as customer service at all. It totally started as, hey, we just need to, like the original package sort at FedEx was dudes throwing packages around on a card table. So they're like, that's not scalable. We need some new technology. And that turned into package tracking. And then it turned actually into new revenue where they can start to do like live supply chain stuff. So I think we're seeing that same trend in government. But, to everyone else's points, what you need to be able to do is, one, vision and leadership at that level. And then number 2, the partners to come in to make it happen, because these things are so big and complex, no one can do it alone.
Yeah, I'll throw out courage. Mayors and other municipal leaders who have courage, and it's not easy sometimes to have courage when you're a municipal leader and you're playing with other people's money, right? Yeah. So I think it's that courage that's really important.
So it's the innovation change aspect. I know there's the one saying that change will only happen when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. So, Joe, you touched on it though from I don't know if I want to call it business opportunity perspective. When you talk about smart cities, it's huge. Where do you see the business opportunities there?
For commercial industry to come in?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that there's kind of unlimited in some sense, right? So there's certainly the opportunity to come in, provide some of those technologies, but then I think what we start to see is like when we think about the data and the value data has, a lot of those business opportunities probably haven't been thought of yet because we haven't brought the data together to see, hey, what can we actually kind of extrapolate from this? And I think, probably to pull on the continuing thread of all of this stuff, it's not just the business opportunities for industry, but it's also the opportunities to deliver new services to citizens. We've done a bunch of research on how government tends to innovate, and government tends to love to layer new technologies onto old ways of doing business, right? Exactly like you're saying, right? If we're batted in person, we shouldn't be batted on the app, frustrated on the app. That was actually my example of the Postal Service and rocket mail. So when the Navy started with the Regulus missiles, first cruise missiles, the Postmaster General said aha, that's what we'll do. That's cutting edge technology. We need to be cutting edge. Bam, mail delivering rockets. They did this once. They put mail on a submarine and launched a rocket into Florida. And yeah, it was a terrible idea. But I think that gets at the idea of, hey, not only looking for new opportunities for businesses, but also where are the new opportunities to actually deliver fundamentally new services to citizens? And it's pretty cool. It's a cool time.
Lisa, you're with a major corporation, and again, it was only, a year or two that you created the Open Blue. As much as you can share, where do you see that going? Do you see that being an increasing area of opportunity, or?
Absolutely, because I think that it's that IT, OT that's actually combining. I think the concept came up before in terms of why we can't, it was the New Deal and how things were so old, and the thing that's been holding America back has been all this deferred maintenance. We just haven't invested in our infrastructure. We haven't invested. It's a travesty how we haven't invested so much, and deferred maintenance became kind of commonplace and accepted in government. So absolutely, if you can take a look at what is needed, and that particular group has grown out of the energy solutions group we had, and then we shifted into something we called performance infrastructure, because we realized energy efficiency is important, but it's not the event. It's not the compelling event or the end goal. At this point, it almost becomes a nice side effect of investments that are happening. So it's important from an efficiency standpoint to save energy. It's an important for your budgets as well, but it's a side effect. And so I think it's, again, technology for technology's sake. You've both said that before. That's not the goal either. What we can do in order to make things more efficient and take technology in order to improve folks' lives so that they stay and they remain in those communities. And I think that when you digitally transform and you bring your systems together and you create a platform that actually allows it to come in and then analyze that data, and again, lets you make those data-driven decisions that helps you actually for the future, you're in great place. So we're really fortunate. We have a public-private partnership group and a structured finance group. We just created our own capital. We have green bonds that we actually work with now. Financing has become a very personal thing for different cities. And so many cities will do a variety. They'll do municipal leases. They'll also do public-private partnerships. They'll also do PPAs. They also might work with contingent financing, and various customers are attracted to different things. So it's very important to have partners. It's very important for people to all be walking towards that digital transformation. And it's very important to have your systems all speak together and move in the same place, or else you have those stranded assets. And again, that's inefficiency. And you're playing with people's money when you're working with tax dollars. So it's been a wonderful ride. We're seeing a lot of customers, and it's not just government, it's across all the verticals, really embrace Open Blue, because it simplifies things. And that's what we all need, to be efficient, and it needs to be simple so we can move on with our days.
So would you say Open Blue is more of a comprehensive approach to solving a problem than selling a product or service? It wraps. I would agree with you. It's the latter, and it does wrap around, hopefully, all the products and solutions that we provide, as well as what our partners provide too. So. And speaking of partners, would you partner with, like a consulting firm?
We always do.
All right, so you're ahead of me. Okay, all right, good.
And that's another thing when we were talking about best practices, and I'm sure Mayor Mason can talk to this as well. If one company comes in and tells you they can be your smart cities provider, they're not telling you the truth, because it needs to be a coalition in order for you to truly be able to get the opportunities, the goals that you're looking for. So companies like ourselves and other companies, you must learn to partner. I'm not saying it's the same partners in every city because there's different priorities, but there will be people who have better relationships, or they have the solutions that are more targeted at that particular community. They then build that cohort or coalition. And I've been on many different pursuits where it's been some stable and consistent, same partners, but then many of them are very different. And you have to be flexible, but you have to partner. Because I think at the beginning, there were a few companies, which will remain nameless, very large, we all touch them, I guess, on a day-to-day basis, who said, I can do everything. Or give me a weekend, and what they could do, I could throw 100 people in this room, and then we'll come up with as well. People understanding, and partners and private companies understanding their swim lanes and what they do best is the best thing that can happen for government. When people are all over the place, it's really doing a disservice.
Got it. Another question that's come in is, for all the panelists, many have suggested that one of the impacts of the pandemic was to put smart cities development on a fast track. What are some of the obvious and not so obvious ways in which urban environments might adapt to and capitalize on the changes wrought by COVID?
At the beginning, and I'll ask Mayor Mason, because we were so laser focused on this, I was told it was halted because the pandemic happened and it was really ferociously moving forward. And then smart cities initiatives kind of stopped because people were like, okay, what are my rudimentary services that I need to keep going? I can't think about these lovely little projects that are nice to have. I need to do what must have. So I think it did take a pause for a little bit.
It was definitely a shift. So again, we're really excited about the autonomous vehicle, but as you're trying to partner with academic institutions that aren't even meeting in person, and we're telling employees at City Hall to work from home whenever they can, it changes things. Now, that did put to the front of the line the work that we wanted to do on creating public Wi-Fi spots around our community centers and public buildings. So as people were home and needed access to the internet more than ever, there was more of an opportunity for our neighborhoods to be able to do that. So it definitely put a pause button on what you thought was going to be next. But then, after everybody sort of caught their breath after the pandemic first hit, it was like, okay, well, what do we need to prioritize as people are staying home and trying to stay safe? What are the smart city elements that people are going to need while they're mostly at home? And it was connectivity.
Yep, exactly.
Became almost paramount and eclipsed everything else.
And if you remember in the early CARES Act, I think there was a big chunk of money for rural broadband because it was such a glaring, it was that spotlight that was being shown, that it was that connectivity piece. So the wonderful thing is that so many cities have moved forward with the connectivity initiatives that they might not have done if COVID didn't happen. So.
Exactly, laying that foundation for the technologies of 10, 20, 30 years from now. May look back and see this as kind of the turning point.
It's one of the benefits of what has happened. No, I know at university as well, it's, the students, you have to give them access somehow, so that was a big thing. Long way from when I was in the military, and I got to tell you this story, when I was in the military, not all the barracks had, Wi-Fi. They didn't have Wi-Fi at all. So what you would do is you'd go sit in the parking lot of the Burger King, even when it was closed, and access their Wi-Fi to get connected. So I think people have gotten very creative, and I think it's forced us in some ways to make things happen in a lot better way.
And George, I'll continue on that because kind of, getting Mayor Mason's shift in emphasis, I think you see that come out in the data as well, right? If you look at just something like Google search trends, for smart cities, we're all kind of, we've been uncomfortable with the term throughout all these presentations, and you can see that, right? Like search volume for smart cities has dropped, but it's been replaced by some other things, right? Sustainability, mobility,
communities,
access,
resiliency.
Exactly. So I think it's actually been another kind of productive shift of the stress, the external shock of the pandemic is kind of forcing us to almost go back and think of it. All right, smart cities is not just tech-led development. It's this democratic exercise of trying to figure out what's important and how do we get from here to there.
Yeah. I'll jump in and actually say I'll agree that. You see these, and I'll use government as an example, chief resiliency officers are popping up everywhere.
Yes.
Certain universities are creating smart city programs. This is beautiful.
Yeah. We've got one.
Right?
We've got one. So for all those you watching, we have one.
Exactly. So these are all benefits that have actually come out. If cities are investing in a C-level individual who's going to be focused just on resiliency, and whatever that means to that individual city. I mean, I remember seeing it in Houston, in Miami. There, in a whole chief infrastructure officer I've also been seeing, and I think they came out, chief sustainability officers, I saw rose from like the economic development group, and then they started, but I started seeing those kind of chief resiliency officers, infrastructure officers, which I think shows great progress and innovation in the, in the space of government.
Got it. Very good. We're almost at quitting time, but what I'd like to do is give each panelist an opportunity. If there was one or two top of mind thoughts that you think are important for our global audience around the world to take away from this today, what would be your thoughts around it? I don't know, Joe, can we start with you?
Sure, absolutely. And I think it's probably the same themes we've heard again and again and again, right? Because if we're hearing them so many times, it's probably because they're important, right? So it's, hey, smart cities are not just about technology. They're about achieving a collective end, a collective goal that we all desire, right? In that sense, they are this kind of democratic exercise. And so hopefully, through the smart cities progress, we actually demonstrate that democracy has this great value and is actually the engine of progress rather than a barrier holding it back. And then I think, from that, it's exactly what we talked about as well is, that becomes not a destination, not even a box that you pick up off the shelf, but it's a process. And thinking through the process, bringing the right stakeholders at the right time, coordinating all the citizens, government agencies, vendors to make these things a reality. That's kind of the secret sauce of smart cities, more than any transistor or sensor or anything fancy like that.
Got it. Lisa?
I'll just say a couple of points. Be bold. Be brave. Don't worry about stubbing your toe, because you learn so much as you move forward. So that's a really important part, is that courageous element. And I'm not going to repeat all the wonderful stuff that was said here, but be holistic. Make sure you think about sustainability, think about something more than just that individual project, but then what it's going to be in 10, 20, 30 years. But then, bite the elephant one piece at a time. I think that's why smart neighborhoods and smart corridors and smart streets have become attractive, because a lot of smart city initiatives have kind of fallen by the wayside because they're too enormous in terms of, beginning. So if you can have a vision, but then start it, and I'm not saying it has to be a pilot, but something where you actually find something, learn that success, communicate that success to your constituents, and then move forward, and then add more partners, add more space, add more opportunity, more innovation. That's the way to go. And the last thing we didn't talk about that is we talked about LEED certification, but I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with well buildings. And I think that when we're having this human-centric conversation, it's more human-centric. It's similar to LEED. It's a rating system. We just joined the IWBI, I think, in February, and I think you can get building certified. You can also get people certified. I'm actually looking to do that myself, but I like it. It's 10 different categories beyond LEED, which I think was fantastic, and a lot of it has to do with exactly what we're talking about here. So,
and Lisa, one more time, what is that?
IWBI, Well Buildings Institute, International Well Buildings Institute.
Okay, so if individuals want more information.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that. I just think that it's a nice thing, an additional thing to add to your knowledge.
No, I think it's great.
Yeah.
I didn't know about it, so
Sure.
thank you.
Yep.
Mayor Mason.
I would just echo what's been said already about cultivating humanity and democracy and being courageous and bold in this. I guess I would end with one final thing that bears mentioning here is partnerships. Right? I mean, partnerships are key to all of this, certainly with the private sector, but also, I remember having conversations early on with Dean James about how are we going to do this and why are we doing this, and sitting around not just with city officials, but with county officials and university officials and technical college officials and, the partners that have been pillars of this community for years, and looking across the room at each other and saying, well, why do we want to do this? Why does Smart City makes sense? And I will just say I'm thrilled to have you sitting here, George, as an outgrowth of those partnerships that we've had around these smart city conversations, and having UW-Parkside really take this leadership role around smart cities and innovation. Is a brand new program that's brought us here today. So don't overlook the partnerships that you already have, and using smart cities as an opportunity to enhance and re-engage them.
Great. No, I think great insights. I got to say thank you to all our panelists. Thank you for your insights, your knowledge, for being here, for making a difference. Thank you to the crew for making this happen with all the technology. And thank you to our audience for being there. Just to let you know, we've got a couple other events coming up. We'll have events, scheduled dates we're working on. Chelsea Collier from DigiCity, and then also Jonathan Reichenthal. And people ask me, what's the best book you've read on smart cities? I got to tell you, it's his book, Smart Cities for Dummies. It's a great book. It lays things out very clearly. So stay tuned. We have some upcoming events with these two individuals. And if you want to stay up to date with us, pull out your QR reader, grab the QR code. You can get connected to our site. You can follow us. You'll get the dates with the speakers and other information we have as it becomes available. So with that, I thank you very much. Appreciate your being with us. Stay well.